Good afternoon, Minnesota. This is Captain Matthew Ecklund coming to you live from the waters of Lake Erie. We are just about to set our mainsail on the sailing vessel Rose. So I'm going to help out with that task as we get ready to try to catch some wind. So as people are starting to tune in, I'm going to be handling a line down here called our main sheet, and that is going to control this sail as we raise it up. I'm going to be talking a little bit today about life in isolation out on the water on a sailboat, and lessons learned in that arena. So our main is going up right now. I'll flip the camera around so you can see what I'm seeing. Okay, they're telling me that the video is sideways, so we're going vertically. Let me know if this is working a little better for all of you. What we are running into right now is our mainsail cars getting caught up as the sail is getting ready to be hoisted into the air. I am looking forward to coming back and seeing everybody in Minnesota this summer. I will be back in Grand Marais in July and taking passengers out to sail on the Yortis. For those of you who are just tuning in, I am on my sailboat, a 42-foot vessel called Rose, and we are out in the middle of Lake Erie right now, where it is a bright sunny day with not a lot of wind. But we're going to try to use a little bit of that to move. And once the sail is up, I will give you a little tour of our vessel and talk to you a little bit about some of the things that I have learned in about a decade of spending time out at sea. We just fired up our main engine, which we're using to point ourselves up into the wind, and that's going to make raising up our mainsail a little bit easier. All right. Sitting down up at the bow. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I am out at sea right now with two shipmates, and that's been kind of typical of my experience working on boats for the last 10 years. It's usually with a small crew, and some of you living at home in these times of social distancing may be there with one or two other people. Maybe you're there by yourself, and perhaps that has been trying for some of you. I know that a lot of the time when we're out in when we're stuck in a position where we're kind of trapped in a small space, it can take a lot of effort to feel like we're finding ways to get along with everybody that we're in those spaces with, and that's certainly been true at sea. I think one of the things that sailing has taught me consistently is that you may not like the people that you go to sea with, but you end up having to really trust those folks, and you have to learn a lot from being with them. So My experience sailing started in 2008 when I was a student in college. I found a small little postcard in the classics department of Macalester College that was that said simply, it was a picture of a white sail brigantine, and it simply said, "Come sail with us." And I thought that that would be a really unique experience and a really incredible experience. I studied art and spent a lot of time in the studio, painting, drawing, and I wanted to step outside of my comfort zone and go to a place where I'd never been, and a place that was really challenging. And I'd grown up in Minnesota. Lake Superior had been my kind of a special, sacred place that I would go to ever since I was a little kid. And in spending time up there, I had some early memories of being immersed in water, jumping into the lake, almost freezing, and not having a super positive experience around water from a young age. And so I really wanted, when later on in life, I really wanted to get over that fear and find a way to test myself and kind of put myself out of my element. And so I knew nothing about sailing when I went to sea for the first time in 2008. Learned a lot about that in the course of an 8-week component on shore in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, where we were living in close proximity with a bunch of other students. And then the second half of that semester was spent living aboard a twin-masted brigantine called the Corwith Kramer. And it was aboard that vessel that I really started to, I got my first experience both with sailing, which was an incredible thing to become acquainted with, and was incredibly challenging as well. I knew very little about all of the different elements that would make that so challenging, and so ultimately so addictive. I've kind of considered sailing to be a pretty healthy addiction, relatively speaking. It's an opportunity to really kind of travel inward and to adapt to elements that are changing all around you that you don't have control over. And I think that in these times that we're living in right now, that has proven to be really beneficial knowledge to have. I find that now that I'm back on the water again, but also in the time that I was living ashore in Minnesota, there are just so many corollaries between living in isolation, living on a boat, electing to do that, and kind of being forced out of your comfort zone to do that. And there's a phrase that I often repeat to myself in the world of living on boats and sailing, which is that I cannot change the wind. I can only trim my sails. And as we're doing right now, we're getting ready to unfurl our forestaysail, which happened just now, changing the light a little bit. And these are the conditions right now on Lake Erie. It's pretty calm, but there's a light breeze coming in out of the east. And we're harnessing that wind as best we can to try to move our vessel. So I think the corollary there is that for those of us living in these times of pandemic and living in isolation, we are really forced to adapt to this world and adapt to these elements in ways that we really didn't set out to do. And that is the changing wind that we are forced to now try to move with and live with. And I think that for people who are used to spending time out on the water, what I've noticed is that among friends of mine who are sailors, in some ways it seems like the familiarity with living far away from the people you love, where you're out of contact with them, having to roll with changing elements and adapt to those things, learning to get along with people as best you can, whether or not you would choose to spend your time with them. I think all of those things are extremely important. So when I first set out to sea, there were a lot of things that I learned and had to learn pretty fast. One of them is that the sea isn't always your friend, and the conditions are such that sometimes the best thing that you can do is kind of hold on and brace for whatever is coming. So I remember a time when I was first standing bow watch, a position being the forward lookout of the boat. Right here at the bow of Rose, this is similar to the boat that I was on a much smaller scale, where you would go forward right up there to the head stay of the boat, wearing a harness, and you'd clip in, and when you clipped in wearing a harness at night, you were carabiner tethered to the boat. And the very front of the boat, the bow, is the part that moves the most. So it's an exciting place to be. It can also be kind of a frightening place to be. And at about 20 years old, 21 maybe, I am clipped in for the first time as we're sailing our vessel from Key West, Florida, north with the north flowing waters of the Gulf Stream along the coast of Florida. And as we're sailing along, the wind is moving in a sort of southeasterly direction, so it's opposing the sea. And the effect that that's having is that the waves moving one direction against the wind that's pushing us the other way is producing this building sea state. And it's really, it's amazing and it's beautiful. The waters, as they hit the bow of the boat, are splashing up on deck, and there is bioluminescent phytoplankton, which, when its body comes into contact with parts of the boat, it excites these microorganisms, and they flash and they bioluminesce. So the waves that are hitting the bow of this boat, as I'm up there clipped into the bow, are kind of turning this this light yellowish green color. So the waves are literally glowing in the dark, and I'm getting splashed by these waves, and they're increasing and building and building and building in size. And it's fun, but it's also kind of terrifying. And being up there at the bow, the front of the boat is rising up probably 10 feet and then plunging back down. And so there's this effect of seeing nothing but sky and then nothing but water as the boat is moving. And eventually I start feeling really seasick. And seasickness, a lot of passengers who come out sailing with me on the Yortis ask about this. How can I keep myself from getting seasick? Is there anything that I can do? And the truth is, a lot of it is kind of mind over matter. If you start to cogitate upon and really think about getting seasick, that tends to be when it starts to happen to you. And so as a novice sailor, I'm standing at the bow of the boat, and I start to think a lot about the effect that these great plunging waves are having on on my stomach and also my psyche. And I start thinking a lot about this, and it becomes the only thing that I can think about. And this shift on the boat in this rotating watch system of standing at the bow and being a forward lookout last about an hour before you're relieved by another member of the crew who comes up and taps you on the shoulder, clips into the same stay. You point out what you've been looking at, what you've been seeing, and then that person relieves you, and you head back to the boat. So about 10 minutes before the end of this shift, my thoughts about being sick become all-consuming, and I reach a point where I can hold it in no longer, and I'm trying to distract myself by singing a song, and for some reason the song that was coming into my head was Tale as Old as Time from Beauty and the Beast. And I got about that far into the lyrics, tale as old as, and then I just projectile vomited all over the front of this boat. Now, that was really disgusting and terrible. But in about 10 seconds, a colossal wave, as the bow plunged forward, washed all of that off of me and all of that off of the front of the boat. And all was well, and, albeit in a much grosser, wetter state. So that taught me a couple of things. It taught me, one, about the power of the mind to overcome certain things, and it also taught me that a lot of the time conditions come along where you really can't do much other than just kind of give in to the conditions of the world that surrounds you. And I think that's been something that's been really important to remember in these times right now, is that the nature of being asked to stay at home for the good of ourselves and also the good of people who are more vulnerable than us to getting sick. I'm reminded of some of the lessons that I've learned about being sick myself and succumbing to forces that are a lot more powerful than me that I don't really have control over, and that resisting that is part of what makes it so terrible. Sometimes just giving into a feeling and kind of letting go of something, whether it's the food in your stomach because of the sea state or resistance to change, is really what helps you conquer it, get over it, and move on from that. So I don't think about that story all of the time, but I would say that it has gotten better as I take passengers out sailing on Yortis regularly. There are a couple times when the conditions on Lake Superior have gotten big enough where that becomes pretty uncomfortable. But then again, we try not to take people out when the weather is really rocky and rough. And doing that for a living and having a lot of experience being on boats, part of my job then becomes reading the signs, reading the weather, listening to the forecasts, and kind of trying to become an amateur meteorologist in determining the best times to take people out on the water. So that's another thing that I've learned in the years that I've spent at sea, is that reading the elements becomes a really important part of your job. And it's one of the things that has become, for me, a really compelling draw back to living in this environment. It's really a gift to be able to be in a place where you are in such close contact to nature. As I'm doing this video live with you. The level of the water is just a few feet down from where I am right now. Looking over the bow of Rose, you can see the beams of sunlight penetrating deep down into the water, which is kind of a teal green in color out here. And what's incredible when you spend a lot of time out at sea is the many faces and the many different colors of the water. In the middle of the ocean, when you get hundreds of miles out from shore, the water becomes a deeper blue than this shirt. It almost looks violet. And out there, where you're so far from shore, that deep color of the water is also incredibly clear. And you'll witness beams of light penetrating there, and they seem to go down as farther than the eye can see, just down into the water. And I've had the experience living on boats where we've actually gotten to swim in waters like that out in the middle of the ocean, and that's been a really amazing feeling. One of my fondest memories of being out at sea was a time when we did a mid-ocean swim call with about 20 college students. I was working as a deckhand then on another big tall ship, another sailing vessel that was heading to the South Pacific. And we had recently visited an island called Kiribati, Christmas Island, which is 4 degrees north of the equator. It has an elevation of about 19 feet above sea level. And the island is an atoll formed almost completely of the discarded calcium carbonate shells of all sorts of different organisms. It was an absolutely amazing place to be. And leaving Christmas Island, we sailed south, crossed the equator, and we're out in the middle of nowhere in the ocean. One of my favorite things about being up on the North Shore in Grand Marais is the fact that when you leave the harbor and you head out onto Lake Superior, it is continuous horizon. And like this part of Lake Erie, all you see when you look out there is the color blue. It's just a continuous line along the horizon. And at this particular point in time, on this particular day, that light was shooting down in those infinitely long beams into the water, and the captain decided that conditions would be safe for doing an open ocean swim call. So all hands were called up on deck. I believe it started actually with a safety drill. So we went through the motions of performing a man overboard drill, which involved tossing a ball, which they always call Oscar on these boats, off the side of the boat. Everybody then at that moment becomes a lookout, and their eyes are fixed on the object in the water, which is about the size of a cantaloupe, and you lose sight of it very quickly. And so everyone has a specific task, a specific job aboard the boat to keep their eyes locked on that object, tracking it. Different members of the crew are handling the sails, striking sails as need be, trimming and adjusting them to make sure that the boat is moving at the optimal angle relative to the wind to get back whatever object has been lost overboard. So we captured Oscar, brought Oscar back aboard. Oscar was fine. And at that point, we hove the boat to. So we passed one of our sails over to the opposite side of the ship, opposing the mainsail, which is the main driving sail at the back of the boat. And the boat does, when it becomes hove to, it does sort of a zigzag pattern through the water. So it stops moving forward, and it starts making slow lateral movement through the water around it. And when we did this, it was safe for us to, as a group, with some members of the crew still on board the boat, including a person who is posted aloft in the rigging to keep an eye out for sharks, for all of us to do an open ocean swim call, where we actually jumped off the side of the boat. They rigged up a ladder at the break of the deck in the middle of the rail. It opened up out to sea to allow scientific equipment to be deployed over the side. And we opened that up, rigged up a swim ladder, and then took turns jumping off of the boat. And doing this, we were then swimming in waters that were about 3,000 meters deep. And the deepest, darkest blue I've ever seen. And we came back aboard the boat after about 10 or 15 minutes of swimming off the side and just staring down into infinity in the benthos underneath us. And when we came back aboard, the cook, named Abby, who is one of the members of the crew who hadn't gone over the side, or she may have been in the water briefly just to clean herself off. She had been down below in the galley of the ship, preparing a meal for all of us, and I will never forget the feeling of climbing back up on deck and having baked brie in these loaves with fresh little pita chips that she had made, waiting for us after we had just come out of the ocean. And what I started to realize as these moments would present themselves out at sea is the great magnitude of little moments. Like going for a swim, eating fresh baked food that's prepared for you either by yourself or by somebody else. I really started to think a lot more and become a lot more appreciative of tiny moments like that. And that's something that I've taken away from this time in quarantine as well. Is it's remembering to a lot of it for me has been about remembering to check my gratitude and seeing times where small acts of kindness from one person to another, or just the time to notice little things really seems to take on more import. And I think that that's been one of the takeaways for me of this time and the time that I've spent sailing, is that these little moments really matter quite a bit. When you're isolated on a boat out at sea for extended stretches of time, those are really all the moments that you have, because a lot of your life and a lot of the work that you're doing is occupied with simply paying attention to schedules and routines. And I think that that's another thing that's been really helpful in the midst of these days that we've all been living through, is finding a way, whether you're on a boat or whether you are ashore, to have a healthy routine to get into where times for waking up become consistent, and meal times become consistent. And initially, before I started sailing, I was somewhat resistant to this idea. I wondered whether I would enjoy the regimentation of a day. And what I found as time went on is that it's in the time between those moments of activity and labor and work and steering the boat and doing your job and standing bow watch at the front of the ship, getting down on your hands and knees and scrubbing the deck and the sole. It's in those small moments in between there where there exists a possibility to really appreciate silence and space, moments of stillness, and that for me has been one of my fondest memories about time that I've spent at sea. And one of the big takeaways right now is that pausing to reflect, pausing to appreciate in the midst of trying to add control to times that are uncontrollable and conditions, climate, weather that feels uncontrollable. All of that feels really significant and really important to do. And I think whether it's brie cheese, or whether it's the opportunity to sit and write a postcard to somebody, giving them the gift of your time, and a letter that you're writing, just a moment of appreciation. I've found that pretty consistently being far away from people also makes me realize the impact that they've had on my life and why those people are really important to me. And it gives me a strong desire to say thank you. So I think, I don't know if any of you have experienced this as well, but I think one of the things that this time of isolation is teaching a lot of people is that, and certainly one of the things that it's been teaching me is that people really do matter, and those connections really do matter, and the ability to voice that to the people that you love and respect and care about is important. So I think one of the silver linings in the dark cloud of these times is that people are starting to connect more with one another, and to, in spite of the distance and in spite of the fact that we can't see each other in the same ways that we used to, we're finding creative ways to reach out and share that appreciation and be in community with one another in spite of the fact that we can't physically be there doing that. And I think that that's something that continues to show up on the ocean or on sailboats on the Great Lakes. It really kind of condenses and simplifies life down to its basic elements. When you aren't paying attention to, and when you aren't distracted by all of the noise that surrounds us so much in daily life, you start to concentrate a little more on the things that really matter. And I think that is of that's of great importance and great value. It's, I feel really peaceful in this place, really, really lucky to be able to spend a lot of time out at sea, out on the water. And I think that it's a pretty soothing place to rest and reflect. When I was living on a schooner in San Francisco for 2 years, I taught elementary school students out there, and consistently we would sail underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. And with a boat full of these little 3rd and 4th graders, we would approach this amazing bridge, which towers 300 some feet in the air above the masts of the Seaward, which was the name of the vessel that I was living and working on. And with these 30 kids who are spread all over the deck of the boat, learning lessons about marine organisms that are living in the water, the phytoplankton that are producing the air we breathe through photosynthesis, towing nets through the water beside the boat, and pulling up tiny little copepods and microorganisms that are living in that water, to learning about triangulation and navigation and trying to find your place in this world. All of these kids all over the deck of this boat, talking and learning and spending their first time, many of them, out on a boat, out on the water. We would approach the bridge. Sometimes you couldn't really see it because San Francisco Bay has a ton of fog, but you could hear this low drone of the fog signal. And when we would get close, we would muster all of the kids together in the middle of the boat and say to them, now we're going to spend 3 minutes in silence, and I want you to tune into all of your other senses and tell me what you see, and tell me what you hear, tell me what you smell. What sorts of things are you noticing when you're spending less time talking and more time observing? And remarkably, a boat full of 30 elementary school students would go from talking and jabbering and being surrounded by all of this sensory stimuli all around them, and they would pause and they would quiet down and they would tune into their senses, and they would listen, and we would call this a silent sail. And after about 2 minutes, we'd come back together, and all of these little kids would share some of the things that they'd learned, whether it was seeing a harbor seal jump out of the water beside them or come up to breathe, or whether it was listening to the sounds of cormorants and seagulls and seabirds circling overhead. Times where we're in solitude and when we're in silence offer a lot of opportunity to just pause and listen. And I think that has been a takeaway for me. How can I pause and how can I listen a little bit more? And I don't always have to be moving. And I think we have this this tendency that we must always be moving forward, and we must always be actively talking and working on something. And sometimes I think that there's real value in pausing to tune in and listen and just be still. So perhaps if wherever you are in your lives, maybe it's been a busy, intense day, maybe the noise of the news cycle has been really weighing on you. I'd love to share just a moment of peacefulness and pause with you by kind of gazing out on this infinite horizon in this environment that in many ways doesn't change in the midst of a world that seems like it's constantly moving and constantly creating noise. So let's do a little silent sail together just for a bit. I'll point you out to sea and just give you a minute to maybe find some peacefulness in the midst of the sometimes chaos that surrounds us. So here's just a little bit of lake time solitude for you to take in. So I hope that wherever you are, you're taking this time of being a little bit isolated to tune in and spend a little bit of time in nature as much as you can, and listening to what the world has to teach you, and what maybe we have to teach ourselves. Journaling has been another big part of my journey out at sea, doing a lot of writing, a lot of reflection, and I think that that's a really important thing to do, because it gives us an opportunity to kind of define and start to listen to an own inner counsel that's telling us where to go, maybe what's important, maybe things that direction that needs to change. So a lot of that has been significant for me, both in isolating on land and isolating on boats out on the water. And I've got just a little bit more time, so if anybody has any questions, things that you're curious to know or curious to see, I'd be happy to take a few minutes to respond to those things. Turns out that it's a pretty fine day for sailing out here. The Neptune seems to be smiling on us today. The wind and the weather is pretty pleasant. We can certainly give you a little tour of Rose. As I head aft, I'll spin the camera around so you can kind of see the boat from my perspective. We're up here right now at the bow, so we have a big roller furler down in front of us for a Genoa. This stay rises up to the top of the mast. So now, as we head aft, we're looking at the staysail. There's a forward cabin right here. This is the V berth. That's where my friend Thane lives aboard the boat. Wind vane back aft produces electricity. Our big mainsail right here is generating most of our forward driving force aboard the boat, and then I'll bring you down through the main hatch and show you a little bit of what life is like down below. These are my fellow sailors back aft on the boat, and then we'll head down here. Little quotation worth remembering. And now a glimpse of our galley. So this is where we make all of our food aboard the boat. Space is fairly limited, so you've got to be kind of conservative about what you're bringing aboard and using. The stove is interesting on this boat. It's gimbaled, so as you're producing food, it's rocking back and forth to keep our cooking from spilling all over the place. Back behind these little cabinets, racks filled with spices, and next to those we've got cabinets that are filled with all of our cutlery, from top to bottom in an order that keeps you from getting hurt. Spoons on top in the drawer you can't see, forks, knives. Back behind these we've got more ingredients. So another thing that is very important to do when you're living on a boat or trapped and living on land is to do kind of an inventory of what you've got and a little bit of meal planning, which is what we do up on this board up here. You're now in the main salon of Rose, so well-stacked library. This is a board where we're keeping track of what we're making for all the various meals. An oil-burning lamp, just to have a little warm, cozy feeling of being home. So it's the little things that make a difference and matter. More books. Back behind these benches, which are called settees, are our dry stores for all of our food. So like a good chipmunk in winter, we stockpile a lot of goods. And so these are full of noodles and pasta and pancake mix, teas, coconut milk, soups, all the sorts of things that we need to provision for spending a lot of time out of range of going to the grocery store regularly. Up forward in our boat is our head, the small little bathroom on board the vessel. I'm sure all of you are becoming very well acquainted with your small personal areas as well. We've got about 39 feet down below decks where we can spread out, so every square inch of space is occupied. This is our chart table, so this is our navigation center for the boat. We've got a radar that allows us to keep track of changing weather systems around the boat. Barometer up here lets us monitor how the barometric pressure around us is changing. We try to conserve resources as much as we can on the boat. So up here is a deck prism. This is set in the deck of the ship, and that's casting light on this table down below. Our logbook, where we are documenting everything that's happening around us as we're moving, whether it's a change of sail, whether we're anchoring for the night. And back aft is my cabin, so a little bit messy right now. There's a lot, there's not a ton of room back here, but we make do with what we've got. 2 hatches up above lets in a lot of natural light, and then what makes a little space important is all of the people in it and the boats in it. So here's Yordis sailing up in Grand Marais, and memories of people that I really love and care about. My bed filled with comfy wool Afghans, and that's about it. That's the world that I'm living in right now, and I'm feeling pretty grateful to be here, and grateful to be coming back to Grand Marais really soon. So it's really good to chat with all of you, and I hope that you are doing well, taking care of yourselves, and taking care of the people that you love and care about back at home, and those who are a little farther away from you. So really nice talking with all of you today. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you up on the water on Lake Superior this summer. And I hope you all stay healthy and well. Fair winds, everybody.